The next thing we're going to talk about is a greatest integer function. Now what the greatest integer function looks like is this double set of brackets thing right here around the x. And it says, I want to graph, or the output is the greatest integer not greater than the value of the number inside this double set of brackets. So if I graph the greatest integer function, I'm going to pick some points, 2, 1, 0, -1, 0, and graph the number that's an integer, spelled that wrong, that's not greater than the integer that I plug in, then I get 2 in and 2 goes out. 1 in, 1 goes out. 0 in, 0 goes out. -1 in, -1 goes out. 2 in, 2 goes out. However, what happens if I plug in some decimals, like 1.6? What integer, when I plug this in, so the greatest integer of 1.6, is not greater than 1.6? Well, I can't say 2, so my next integer that is not greater than 1.6 would be 1. If I plugged in the number 0.2, then the integer not greater than the decimal 0.2 is actually 0. When I plug in -0.7, the integer that is not greater than -0.7 can't be 0 because 0 is greater than -0.7. This must be -1. Likewise, -1.1, the integer that's not greater than -1.1 is equal to -2. So when I graph these, here's the 0.22, 1, 1, 0, 0, -1, -1, -2, -2. The problem's going to exist where I start plugging in the decimals. At 1.6, I still get out 1. At 0.2, I still get out 0. At -0.7, I get -1. And at -1.1, I get -2. So the question is, how do I connect these dots now? Well, here's the situation. This has to be a function, which means it has to pass a vertical line test. So it looks like these two dots connect. And I can move as far as I get to this point. Because otherwise, if I put a dot at -1, -2, this would no longer be a function. So I have to move as close as I can to the point -1, -2, and then stop. And the way I say to do that is with an open circle. Likewise, I move further and further to the right here until I get really close to the point 0, -1, and stop. So I put an open circle. I move very close to +1, and right before I get there, I stop, and then at 1, my greatest integer is 1. Continue to move to the right until I get very close to 2, and stop with an open circle. So this creates what's known as a step function. Which is kind of like the nickname for the greatest integer function. I think the easiest way to take and graph these is just start picking some integers and see what happens. I like starting out at least with the -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And then I fill in decimals as I go. So here's my x, here's my y. At -2, the greatest integer of -2 is -2, plus 2 is 0. At -1, the greatest integer is -1, plus 2 is 1. At 0, the greatest integer is 0, plus 2, which is 2. At 1, I get 3, and at 2, I get 4. Now, let's plug in these decimals. Probably easier to start with the positives. For some reason, people understand that better. The greatest integer of 1.7 is actually 1. Then I add 2 to that, and I get 3. Let's take the number 0.2. The greatest integer of 0.2 is 0, and I add 2 to that, and I get 2. Let's take -0.9. The greatest integer of -0.9 is actually -1 plus 2 equals 1. And let's go -1.5. The greatest integer of -1.5 is -2 plus 2, which is 0. So I'm going to start graphing these points once again. -2 and 0. -1.5 and also 0. -1 and 1. -0.9 and 1. 0 and 2. 0.2 and 2. 1 and 3. 1.7 and 3. And then 2 and 4. So again, now we have to find a way to connect these, and it appears everything seems to be traveling to the right from the left, and we have to make sure we have a function. So once we get to the point -1, open circle and stop. Once we get to the 0, open circle and stop. Once we get to the 1, open circle and stop. And once we get to the 2, again, open circle and stop. And there's our step function once again. So here's our last example. Let's make a chart again. Starting with 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. 2 plus 3 is 5. Greatest integer of 5 is 5. 1 plus 3 is 4. Greatest integer is 4. 0 plus 3 is 3. Greatest integer is 3. -1 plus 3 is 2, and the greatest integer of that is 2. And -2 plus 3 is 1, and the greatest integer of that is 1. Start picking decimals like 1.9. 1.9 and 3 is 4.9, and its greatest integer is 4. Let's go 0.2. 0.2 plus 3 is 3.2, whose greatest integer is 3. -0.5 plus 3 is -0.5 plus 3 is 2.5, whose greatest integer is 2. And let's go -1.8. -1.8 plus 3 is +1.2, whose greatest integer is 1. We'll graph all these points, starting with 2, 5, 1.9 and 4, 1 and 4, 0.2 and 3, 0 and 3, -0.5 and 2, -1 and 2, and -1.8 and 1, and -2 and 1. Again, pretty much the same pattern. Move to the left until you create a non-function situation, open circle. Moving to the right, open circle, moving to the right, and open circle, and then moving to the right, and open circle. And that's about it. So make sure you do your Connect Ed problems for lesson 10, and we'll see you tomorrow.